When I look back on it now, so many of the people that I know, that I lived with and was involved with in those days, are either dead or in prison. Most of them. Very few people survived that life. I grew up mostly in Wellesley, Massachusetts. It's about 20 miles outside of Boston. Upper middle class, WASP type of town. By 10th grade, I was wrestling and was captain of the wrestling team, went undefeated, played football, was fullback on the football team, and had kind of a normal, somewhat of a normal teenage life. My senior year in high school, I started smoking pot. I'll never forget, I was with these friends of mine, and this one kid had a joint, and we were like, wow, man, marijuana. Because in those days, it was like taboo, and everybody thought, oh, it was like reefer madness. You know, you smoke one joint and you become a heroin addict the next day. You start mainlining junk. But we were like, let's smoke it, man, turn it on. And I'll never forget, LBJ was on the radio.
My fellow Merrill.
President Johnson. And we were sitting there stoned, listening to this guy going, is this the fucking president of the United States? He sounds like some, Uncle Cornpone from down on the farm. I mean, we couldn't believe it because it sounded different. Everything was different. And that was like the beginning of a whole change in who I was as a person. I went to college in Arizona State University. I started going down to Mexico on weekends and stuff like that. My roommate and I ended up in this like cantina. We were drinking tequila and hanging out. It was obviously a whorehouse. There were a bunch of whores in there. So the bartender's asking me, he goes, well, don't you want a girl? And I'm like, no, man, I want some pot. You got any pot? Is there any marijuana around here? And he goes, oh, yeah, wait a minute. I only wanted to buy a couple of joints. But he goes, no, man, I only sell kilos. So I'm like, well, how much are the kilos? And he goes, $100 a kilo. And I'm like thinking, wow, man, I got $300 on me if I bought 3 kilos. So I did. I bought the 3 kilos, borrowed a screwdriver from this guy, took the panel off the door of the truck of my roommate and hid the kilos in there. And I'll never forget, man, when I drove up to the customs place, I was going back into the United States, and that guy came out. I was really nervous. I was like, my throat was dry, my hands were all nervous, but I loved it. And as soon as the guy was like, how long you been down in Mexico? I went, oh, just a couple of days. Where are you going now? Back to school. He's like, okay, have fun, see you later. Drove off, and it was such a rush. I'll never forget it, man. It was just like, wow, I loved it. So I did it like 3 more times that year. I took the pot back to Boston. I made $1,500, which in those days, man, in 1964, 65, I was 19 years old. It was a lot of money. I did a long 2-part article, or actually it was an interview with Mailer that was published in Rolling Stone. And that led to me getting an assignment from Rolling Stone to go up to Toronto, write an article about the school up there called Rochdale College, which was actually an experimental school, like an open, free school, but it had turned into one of the biggest soft drug dealing centers in North America. And Robert Robotham, was like the hippie godfather of Toronto. He had a huge operation going on. He was a millionaire in his early 20s in cash, just from dealing hash, basically. He had thousands and thousands of pounds of hash at times that he was dealing. So I hooked up with him. I was going to write the article about him, but then when he and I got together and he knew what I did and I knew what he did, we were like, fuck Rolling Stone article, let's just smuggle some hash. Things just expanded from there. I mean, we were smuggling pot in from Mexico, selling some of it in the United States, bringing a bunch of it up to Canada, because in those days there was no pot at all in Canada. So marijuana went for a lot more money up there. That period from, I would say, 72 to 82, those 10 years were, I was just full on, 24 hours a day, smuggling drugs. That's all I did. And I was making a fortune, a lot of money. Bringing loads in from Colombia, Jamaica, Thailand, Lebanon, Afghanistan, landed planes and flying from Mexico into Texas. We had a big ranch in Texas with 5,000-foot airstrip on it. So it was just full-time, 24 hours a day, smuggling drugs. That's all we did. Smuggling pot, not drugs, because we didn't do no heroin, no coke. It was all marijuana. marijuana and hashish, and traveling around the world. We had a shitload of money. We had more money than we knew what to do with. They had thousands of acres of land in Texas, and maybe another 300 or 400 acres of land up in Maine. I mean, I had a place in the Bahamas, I had a place in New York City, I had a place up here in Bedford. It was nuts, man. It was like spending money as fast as I could make it. That was the other thing too, you get compulsive about spending money. You're just like, got all this fucking money. I'm like, let's rent a Learjet and go to Paris for the weekend. You know, it was no big deal. I was like, okay, that's what we'll do. We had suitcases full of money. We didn't know what to do with the money. It was like, that was one of the biggest problems, was how to deal with the money. I had like phony IDs for like 3 or 4 different names. Like whenever I'd fly from one place to another, I'd have to be thinking, well, who am I today? You know, I mean, this guy, okay, and that's my profile. So you're constantly living with the threat of getting arrested. You've got a lot of incriminating stuff on you at all times, your books, your financial records, money, drugs, always a lot of drugs stashed from one place or another, drinking a lot, smoking a lot of pot, acid, definitely, I did acid, ate mushrooms on a regular basis, peyote, mescaline, you know, all those drugs, we did them all. Partying like nuts, you know, after a load would come in, check into the Plaza Hotel, stay in a suite that was like $2,000 or $3,000 a day, you know, and you had money, you always pick up the tab, and you would be out, no matter where we were, no matter what the bill was, I would always pay it. Everybody wanted to be around because you had the best drugs. I used to say to people, the only person that's more popular than a rock star is a rock star's dealer, you know, I mean, we were invited to all the best parties and, you know, hung out with whoever, Neil Young and, you know, the Eagles and people like that. Neil Young's brother was involved in our scam, got busted with us. I met Hunter Thompson because I was working for Rolling Stone. I had done the mailer interview and Hunter loved it. Jan Wenner, who was the publisher of Rolling Stone, came up there and we all met, we smoked pot and we hung out together. You know, I think in those days we really thought that, we always thought that marijuana was ultimately going to be legalized, and that we would be seen more as like folk heroes than criminals. We never really thought of ourselves as criminals. But looking back on it, and even then, I think I realized that so many of the people that we were involved with were full-on criminals. I mean, organized crime people that I was dealing with in Lebanon were into the heroin business. A lot of the people that I was involved with in this country were into cocaine. People were getting killed, and you know, it was full-on crime too. You know, I mean, it's a serious business. When you're involved in something like that, the stuff that you're doing is creating negative energy, even if you yourself believe that you're being moral, or not moral, but at least working from some code of ethics. So there was always that sense that I'm doing something wrong here, but I believe in it. Look, we used to joke about it, you know, that people were enjoying it. I mean, look, let's face it, people really still to this day, you know, marijuana is a very much appreciated substance in this culture. What we were doing, we saw as a political movement to get America high. The hippies per se were more or less like, you know, I wouldn't say we looked down on them, but we were like, oh, they were the consumers, you know, they were like kids who didn't take baths and shit like that. The people that I hung out with were, a lot of them looked very straight, but, you know, were freaks, total freaks. But looked straight because they wanted to try to pass muster going through customs and immigration, traveling around, you know. But the other thing that I always felt good about was that I employed a lot of people too. I employed a tremendous amount of people, and not only just it worked directly for me, but whenever you bring in a big load like that, a lot of people make a lot of money. All the dealers all the way down are getting money off of your trip. So you're contributing to the economy.